G'day guys, and welcome back to another episode of the Natural Herb Keeper, and today I'm going to be showing you all about my morphed axolotls and the tank that I've created for them. Now the tank is massively overgrown at the moment. It hasn't had much love and attention in a while, so we're going to jump in there, give it a bit of a tidy up. I'll show you how I've done the background and how I'm keeping these guys up here in North Queensland. So let's pop them into a tub and we'll jump in and check it out. Alright, so let's start with the size of the enclosure. It's a basic reptile 1 enclosure. It's 90 centimeters, 45 tall, 45 deep, and as you can see I have a custom lid for it. Now the reason for the custom lid is that this needs to house the cooling system, okay, which is what we can see up the back here. And why does it need a cooling system? Because salamanders or morphed axolotls, which is what I've got in here, need to be kept cool. So what happened 4.5 years ago, guys, I went down to my local fish shop going to buy a paludarium, walked out with the paludarium and 2 salamanders. Now once I got these guys home, started researching about them, looking into the laws as to how we can have these guys. They're not tiger salamanders or anything along that line, they are morphed axolotls. Obviously we can't have salamanders here in Australia, but you can have axolotls. So if the axolotl morphs, you can then keep that morph form of it as well. So the research I did for them was very clear that they need to be kept cool. I live in North Queensland. Our average summer temperatures are about, you know, like 30 to 35 degrees, and if we get down to like 25 to 28 at night, that's a cool night, okay? It rarely gets to those sort of temperatures, so it is very hot up here. And these guys weren't going to make it through their first summer unless I built some sort of cooling system for them. Now when it comes to reptiles, we are really good at heating them. We've been heating reptiles for a very long time. We've you know, perfected the art, so to say. When it comes to cooling, totally different ball game. All right, there's very little information out there about how to cool an enclosure. So there's a bit of information out there about cooling fish tanks, obviously. Okay, the fish guys have been doing that for a while with chillers. That's great, that cools the water. Okay, I tried that with this. Didn't cool the overall enclosure enough for these guys. Okay, so then I adapted the cooling system. Instead of pumping the cold water through there, I started pumping cold water through a radiator system that I had up on the top here, with then fans blowing through that like an air conditioning system. Again, helped to lower the temperature, but not enough, and couldn't cope with the heat in summer. So after a lot of research and a lot of money later, okay, this was not a cheap project at all, guys, I came across a Peltier cooling system, which is what I'm currently using, and that's the one I've been using for the last like 4 years now. It works really well, okay? It drops the temperature in here so that during summer it sits at about 25 to 26 degrees, and they've been in there for about the last 4 years now. So that's sort of how I ended up with these guys, okay? So morphed axolotls, not salamanders. And that's how I started on the road towards building this enclosure, and it is really unique. It was quite a challenge. It took me a number of months to get this right. While I was trying to get it right, I had these guys living in an air-conditioned room for the whole time, so they are fairly spoiled little individuals. But nevertheless, when you impulse buy something, if you haven't done your research first, you need to do it later, and I was dedicated to providing the correct environment for these animals. So with that, guys, let's jump in and I'll show you a closer view of what's actually happening in here. Okay, so as well as that horrible LED strip light that's flickering at the back there, guys, I am also running a Phoenix 24/7 planted fish tank light. This is the remote for that there. So just let me see if I can get that onto a brighter setting for you. That's supposed to be the brighter setting. Oh, all right, hang on. I want to talk about being overgrown, guys. I'm just going to take you off the stand here. Have a look at why the lighting is so terrible. This is what happens when you forget about planted tanks that grow really well. So the entire light is covered with the creeping fig. So I guess before we do anything else, we need to get rid of that. So let's pop you guys back in here. I'm going to start ripping that fig out and see what we can find. Okay, voila, we have some light back in there, so that's a good start. All of that was growing right up on top of the actual light that's mounted up here across the front as well. So with that gone, it does give us a bit of a better idea of what's happening in here, and it's totally overgrown because that light was covered, or the light at the front was being covered by those plants. It looks like a lot of the plants at the back aren't actually faring too well. So I think before I go too much further, really need to pull out anything that looks dead, pull out that LED strip light that's flickering over there, and replace that, and then see where we go with putting in some new plants and modifying what we've got, so we can actually see what we're working with here, guys. Okay, so that's the old strip light out. That's just a basic cheap strip light that came from Bunnings. It's lasted 4 years. I'm surprised it's lasted that long. As you can see, the plant growth from it's been pretty good. So I couldn't get that exact one, but I found this one at Bunnings the other day. I used the R8 Grid Connect stuff like for the power boards and the like the plug-in little timers. So I thought I'd give this one a go. It was pretty cheap. I think it was maybe like 20-30 bucks, something like that. So I'm going to see how this goes for growing lights as well. It seems like it's got programmable colors in there, times, all that sort of gear. So let's go ahead and give that a go, see if we can get it in here. So this is the top of the enclosure as we're looking at it, and because it needs to stay cool, the whole thing is insulated. So if we lift the lid up here, you can see polystyrene through the whole thing. Alright, so it is important that I keep everything sealed. It does make it tricky for installing things like lights. So basically I need to put the cord or the actual light itself through these small holes, through the hole. Oh, we've got a gecko living in here as well. Through that hole down into the enclosure. So that's what I'm going to work on now, trying to thread all of that through. And then hopefully we can get it set up in there. Okay, so we've got the LED strip through the roof and inside the enclosure. Now it does come with this, oh, is that going to focus? Let me have a look. Okay, so it does come with this 3M, you know, self-adhesive stuff on the back. I found with the painted foam that it's sticking to that doesn't work the best. So what I do as well as using that sticky stuff is I simply have a roll of fencing wire here. Alright, real simple. All I'm going to do is cut a few pieces of that. They don't need to be very big. Okay, you can see that there. And then I just bend that in half, so you have these little plugs. Okay, so then what we have is these little U shapes. You could probably buy those if you didn't want to make your own, but I've got plenty of wire, so I just make these myself, and then I just use that attached into the foam, and that holds the light in place. So let's go through and make a few of those now and get this light in. Alright guys, so that's the LED strip in. Now I've only temporarily place this in at the moment, so I've only popped a couple of those little metal clips in there just to hold it so I get an idea of what it's going to look like. Once I've played around with the light and got that happy, I will fix that in permanently with a few more. The self-adhesive isn't sticking to that foam at all, so I'll need to put a lot more of those little U wire clips in there to hold this in place. But to start with, here's the remote. Can you guys see that? There we go. So let's turn this on. Alright, so there's a pile of different settings here on the remote. You can adjust brightness, you can take that down, take it back up again. You've got change it to warm white, night, or cool white, and then you've got a few of these settings down the bottom that rotate it through different colors. Not that I would probably ever use any of those in here, but you never know, it might be something you're interested in for some reason or another. So let's just take this back to cool white. That's what we're going to be using it on. Now I'm pointing it off screen over this way, guys. That's where I've got the sensor for it set up at the moment. Okay, so let's get it back onto cool white. That is quite bright, so I'll just see if I can adjust the lighting. There we go, a little bit, so you guys can actually get a better idea of what it looks like. So it is super bright in there now, which is great. But as you can see, a lot of those plants at the back have started to die off. But now that we've got some light in there, we can actually see what's doing. I might just quickly show you guys before I prune the plants back too much more, what the background is and how this enclosure is set up. Alright, so now that we've actually cleaned this up and we can see what's going on in here, let's have a look at how this enclosure has been built. So the background itself, you can see it a lot clearer now. This is that same polystyrene and dirt background that I just built in the latest fish tank build, okay, the Cape York fish tank. So instead of this time having rocks and sand on it like I did for the fish tank background, this one had just plain old garden dirt and peat moss mixed into it, okay, and popped on. So same technique, expand the foam down, sand, or like I said this time the dirt and peat moss on top, wait for it to dry and expand, and this is what you're left with. So I went for this theme and these colours because it fitted in with that sort of natural earthen bank that I was going for in this enclosure. Now to have a look at how it's set up, we actually have part water, which I'm just in the process of draining out down here, and part land. So the highest land point, which is down in the back corner over here, is actually about, like you can see there, that's about the depth in the corner there. So if we come back, it's about 2/3 of the enclosure is dirt up in that back section, and it comes down lower obviously here at the front and then drops down into the water section. So that dirt section is deep enough for them to be able to dig substantial burrow systems. In fact, it's not unusual for these guys to dig a burrow system and disappear for a month or two without me seeing them or anything. One of them went for 6 months at one point, dug a burrow, disappeared, was obviously eating all the earthworms and bugs that are in this enclosure as well, and he popped out 6 months later completely fine. So that's how the setup is to start with. Now what I've actually made, we can sort of see it here now that I've cleaned it and uncovered it. This is actually made out of 2 seed raising trays. Okay, so this is the seed raising trays just down in here. Let's see if I can lighten that a bit for you guys. There we go. So there's one upside down and then one the right way up sitting on top of it. And all I've done is then just, you know, silicone some river stones to the front. Let's see if we can lighten that. There we go. So silicone some river stones to the front there so it sort of blends in. There's some logs. Oh, get in there. There we go. So we've just got bits of bark and log and stuff siliconed in there as well. So the Peltier cooling system that's running this actually drips condensation, just like an air conditioning system would. So that's this unit up there. So it drops condensation down. So that flows through all the substrate down into the water, and then I just drain it out when it gets too full. If it gets too full, it doesn't happen all that often. The plants and the evaporation tends to pull all of that out. Now there's a few rocks in there. The substrate mix again is just pretty standard garden dirt, peat, moss, and you know, bits of sand and stuff mixed through there as well. It's a bit wet now that I've just hosed it all off. It does stay fairly damp in this enclosure on the ground. Walls are always fairly dry though. And then down into the water section. Okay, so let's have a look at the cooling system now, because we actually need to fix that. I've just realized one of the fans isn't working. So this is the bulk of the unit on the outside. And then if we open this up, oh, hang on, sorry, it's a bit hard to do one-handed. All right, so open the lid up. That's where our light goes in. You can see the rest of the polystyrene. This is the light across the front. And this is how the rest of the Peltier cooling system is set up. So this part here is where half of it is on the inside, and then this is the half on the outside. So this is where the heat is created. Okay, there's a series of fans. So there's this fan, and then we have 2 more fans that sit on top. That extracts the heat, and then the cool side is all enclosed within the enclosure itself, all with this polystyrene around it to keep it cool and try and keep as much cool air on the inside as possible. But if we go down here and have a look underneath, okay, so that fan has actually died, so I need to get that out now and replace it with a new fan, and then this will be back to working. So the cold air, these acts like a little air conditioning system. Okay, these little steel plates here, aluminium plates, get cold, the fan pushes that cold air down into the enclosure. So let's get that out and get that replaced to start with. Okay, that's the fan installed and working. Just secured it up the top here with a bit of wire. That's where the USB cable comes out and goes down to the plug at the back there. Now that's working, we can finish off the rest of the setup. You just need to vacuum out and give it a clean first, and then we'll get it all set up and working. So next step is going to be putting some new substrate in the water section, so down in here. Now I do have some plant substrate here that I'm using for another build, so while I've got it I thought I might as well chuck a little bit of this in to start with, because I want to try and grow a few more plants down in the bottom this time than what we've had previously. So it doesn't need to be a lot, it's just going to be, you know, a little bit of extra nutrients for the plants. So just a thin layer of that going in. And then the substrate I'm going to use this time is just sort of a coarse sand. So hopefully that'll lighten it up a little bit. You have to see the water, because the water was always quite dark last time. You just couldn't see too much in there. So I'm hoping that this lighter substrate will still look quite natural, but just be a little bit easier to see the salamanders and get some plant growth happening in there as well. Okay, so I've just gone and harvested a whole pile of plants from one of the other very much overgrown enclosures. So it's just heaps of java moss, a few ferns, a few other little bits and pieces growing in here, and basically just going to pop these in and see how we go. Finish off, just got a few leaves, some old dead timber that I'll just replace in here for all of the isopods and springtails. So a bit more dead wood for those guys. Okay, that pretty much wraps up the refurb. Have a quick look in here, and we'll be pop the glass on, pop the salamanders back in, and it is done. So I think that's turned out pretty well. Cooling system is back working and all set up again. New fan pumping that cold air through, and the rest of that enclosure is now not quite so overgrown, so I can actually see the salamanders and actually enjoy these cool little critters. Well, that wraps up the build for our salamanders, or my morph axolotls. They are very strange little creatures, completely dopey with their own little cute personalities, but nevertheless I have a bit of a soft spot for these guys now. They've been part of the family for quite a few years. So if you've enjoyed this build, if you'd like to see more, as always guys, don't forget to hit that like and subscribe button for us, and the little notification bell at the top there as well. And we will be seeing you in another episode of The Natural Herb Keeper.